Sometimes when silence falls, when the city goes to sleep and only the rustling of the wind is heard from the street, thoughts inevitably return to one terrifying question. What happens to the souls of those who committed evil? I'm not talking about people who made a single mistake. I'm talking about real monsters, murderers, rapists, dictators like Hitler. Where are they now? And is there a reckoning for them on the other side? Edgar Cayce, one of the most mysterious prophets of the 20th century, a man known as the sleeping prophet. He left behind thousands of readings, revelations received in a trance state. Among them, there are those that deal with this very topic. And what he says doesn't fit into simple moral categories. It's not a hell with cauldrons. It's something else, deeper, more frightening. Cayce claimed, the soul does not die. No one's. Not even those whose actions horrify us. Not even those we don't want to call human. The soul leaves the body but does not disappear. It goes to a place where it meets itself, without masks, without excuses, without lies. This place, according to Cayce, resembles a mirror. But in this mirror you don't see a face, you see your entire life in full. And you don't just watch, you relive every moment again. Only now, through the eyes of others. Imagine, a person who caused pain suddenly feels that pain themselves. They feel the fear of their victims, their humiliation, their hopelessness. They feel how hope dies within them. And this is not punishment. This is experience. An experience that the soul must go through in order to realize what it has done. Only then is growth possible. Only then is redemptive transformation possible. But does it always happen? This is where it gets really interesting. Cayce said, not all souls are able to immediately admit what they have done, especially those who during life were consumed by pride, a mania for power, a desire to control and destroy. Some souls after death fall into what he called stuck levels. This is not hell. This is a state of confusion, torment, isolation. These souls cannot move on. They are as if stuck between worlds, unable to accept their guilt, unable to let go of their ego. They wander, trying to find a way out, some of them for centuries. You may ask, so what? They just suffer. Is that enough? But Cayce did not speak of punishment. He spoke of justice as balance. Everything we do returns, but not always instantly, sometimes in the next life, or through dozens of reincarnations. And for now, a soul like Hitler's may be locked in a space where its reality is endless fear and loneliness. Not from God, from itself. And this is where it becomes most unsettling. Edgar Cayce claimed, even the darkest souls, sooner or later, are given the opportunity to return, to reincarnate, not because they are forgiven, but because the soul must go through a lesson. It must live through what it once caused others to endure. And that's when strange things begin to happen. Cayce said that a soul could be born into a body whose life would be full of suffering, not as punishment, but as a mirror of the past. A soul that brought pain to others might go through a life as a rejected child, or as a person who becomes a victim of violence, or someone who lives in horror and fear, in order to feel what they once did to others. This is the law of cause and effect, not revenge, not wrath, but balance. But not all souls go through this. Cayce emphasized, some of them continue to resist. Even after reincarnating, they do not realize their nature. Their ego is so strong that they repeat the same mistakes over and over again. And then fate tightens like a noose. Their life becomes a chain of suffering, loss, inner torment, from which there is no escape. The soul seems to drive itself into a dead end until it finally surrenders, until it says, I understand. Think about it. Maybe you've met such people. They seem cold or frightening, as if there's a black hole in their eyes, and you can't understand where so much darkness in them comes from. Maybe these are exactly those old souls, those who came to correct, or to repeat, because according to Cayce, even Hitler will return. Not as a dictator, but as a person whose entire life will be aimed at making him feel the consequences. This doesn't mean that such souls immediately become light. On the contrary, they may go through many incarnations before surrendering, before laying down their weapons, the inner weapons of pride, anger, hatred, and that is precisely why, as Cayce said, around us may live a soul that once held entire nations in fear, but now it might be blind, helpless, rejected, or someone who becomes a victim of violence themselves. And then the question arises, isn't that too cruel? But here, Cayce was adamant. The soul is eternal, and its growth is not always fast. Sometimes it takes thousands of years, through blood, tears, pain. And only at one moment, like a flash, comes awakening. Then the soul remembers, not facts, but feelings. It begins to see others, not as objects, but as part of itself. And then true purification begins. But until that moment, only trials, only suffering. According to Cayce, the soul is energy of consciousness. It has no form, but it possesses vibration, intention, and memory. And if a soul cannot find the path to healing for too long, it begins to look for a way out. This is where the area begins that Cayce described with special caution. He claimed, there are cases when strong but confused souls can interfere with the consciousness of other people. This is not demonic possession in the religious sense. It's not what frightens us in horror films. It is much subtler and scarier. This can happen when a person is weakened morally, emotionally, spiritually. They have no inner core. They are in depression, in fear, in confusion. And then, like a magnet, they attract the soul that is searching for a way out of its own darkness. Not always consciously, not always with the intent to harm, but the result is the same. Someone else's pain, someone else's distortion begins to affect the person. They change. Their gaze becomes different, their actions are unpredictable, and those around them notice something seems to have happened to them. Cayce claimed that the most vulnerable are the young, the sensitive, the fragile. It is through them that such wandering souls can break through, and if they gain control, even partial, this can explain outbreaks of unmotivated aggression, horrific actions, inexplicable changes. But there is another side. Sometimes a soul of this level is not seeking destruction, but help. It is on the edge. It cannot break out of its closed circle. And then, as Cayce said, it clings to those who are capable of feeling the pain of others, who are open, who can even unknowingly help it remember why it is suffering. There have been cases where, after long prayers, meditations, or psychotherapy, a person suddenly felt released from something heavy, and they sensed something left, as if they had helped not only themselves, but also someone who was nearby but unseen. This idea is frightening and at the same time calls for reflection. What if such souls really do exist in the world, lost, tormented, destructive? And what if our own soul, our light, can become the beacon that helps them emerge from their night? But here, caution is necessary. Cayce emphasized, to help does not mean to sacrifice oneself. Someone who is too open and lacks spiritual protection can themselves be drawn into the abyss. Everything must be conscious, with prayer, with grounding, with the understanding that darkness cannot be conquered with rage, only with light, only with compassion, only with truth. So how can you tell that the person in front of you is a soul carrying the burden of past evil? How can you recognize those who perhaps once committed terrible acts and now live among us. Cayce did not give direct instructions. He believed that such things can only be seen with the heart. Still, in his readings, certain signs appeared. He spoke of a heavy aura, not in a mystical sense, but as a feeling that arises when a person enters a room. You can't explain why, but it feels uncomfortable with them around. The air seems thicker. Their presence feels unnatural. Even if outwardly, everything seems normal. Such people often unsettle animals and children, because they still feel without filters. Sometimes such a soul manifests in constant inner conflict. A person suffers, but cannot explain why. Their life seems restless. Everything appears to be fine, and yet it's not. Something hidden, deep, is raging inside them. Cayce claimed this could be a sign that the soul is struggling with memories of past incarnations. Sometimes such people have a pull toward destruction, not necessarily of others, but of themselves. Alcoholism, addiction, self-destructive relationships. All of this can be a form of punishment the soul creates for itself, without knowing why. But there is another path. Some souls that have passed through evil become bright seekers of truth in a new incarnation. They yearn to serve, to help, to protect, and you don't understand where such strength comes from in them. Such depth, such selflessness. And it's all because their soul, perhaps, once stood on the other side, and now it knows from within the price of pain. These people often go through a difficult childhood, loss, violence, as if the world is testing their resilience, or purifying them. Cayce said, "The soul carries experience, but it is not doomed. Even the darkest soul can become light. The only question is how much pain it is ready to go through in order to be healed. And who will be there when it raises its head for the last time and says, 'Enough'?" Interestingly, according to Cayce, souls often reach for each other across incarnations, and if in this life you encounter someone who causes you terrible pain, perhaps it's not a coincidence. It could be a repetition of an old story, or an attempt to finish it. Perhaps once you were in their place, or they were in yours, and now you've met to resolve what was left unresolved for centuries. And here comes the final yet most important question. Can we ordinary people, not prophets, not mediums, in any way influence the fate of such souls? Or perhaps, do we hold in our hands more than we think? And here we approach the edge, the very core of the question that truly disturbs us. Can we ordinary people, with our fears, mistakes, hopes, influence the fate of those souls who once chose darkness? Can we somehow take part in their redemption, or are they lost to the light forever? Edgar Cayce answered this simply but profoundly. Yes, we can, but not in the way we think. He said that every person is like a note in a great musical composition, and if you live in truth, compassion, prayer, your vibration spreads, even if you say nothing to anyone. You are like a lighthouse in the dark. Souls stuck between worlds search for such sources. They are drawn to them, because even those who have fallen low still carry a spark of the original light deep inside. Prayer. This, Cayce believed, is one of the strongest tools. But not formal prayer, rather deep, sincere prayer, where you ask not for punishment, but for insight, where you do not judge, but call for healing. He said that when a person prays for those they do not understand, for rapists, murderers, traitors, at that moment they open a channel, and into the darkness where the soul is wandering, a beam enters. Not a bright one, but the first. Many don't understand this. They think, why pray for someone who caused pain? Why waste energy? But Cayce taught if we pray only for those we love, there is no heroism in that. But if we pray for those we fear or despise, that is already an act of love, and it changes everything. He also shared that in moments when a soul is on the edge, between complete immersion in the abyss and the possibility of turning back. It is exactly this kind of inner call from the living world that can become decisive. It is no coincidence that many spiritual teachings throughout time say, pray for your enemies, not for their sake, for yours, for the world, for balance. But of course, there is also the other side. Souls that do not want to change, that continue to choose destruction, remain in the cycle of reincarnations, suffering more and more. Cayce said that such souls eventually slow down. Their path becomes heavier, their memory increasingly clouded. They begin to lose contact with themselves. This is true hell, not fire, but the forgetting of one's own essence. But there is always a chance. And this fact, according to Cayce, distinguishes spiritual law from human justice. We may not have forgiveness, but the soul has a path. And sometimes, those whom we consider forever lost become the most powerful healers, because they know what darkness means, and they know how to escape it. And now, we have reached the very edge. The question that frightens even those who don't believe in reincarnation, in the soul, in the afterlife. A question that Cayce approached with great care, like a surgeon who knows that any wrong move could cause pain. What if the soul does not want to change? Is there a limit beyond which there is no return? Cayce's answer was disturbingly honest. He said, there is no absolute disappearance, but there is disintegration. There is what he called the degradation of consciousness, when the soul, having refused all opportunities for growth, gradually begins to lose its structure, not to die, but to fall apart. This is not death. This is a return to chaos, to primordial dust, to nothingness. He compared such souls to a mosaic dropped onto stone. At first it was a face, and then only sharp fragments, consciousness fragments. Purpose is lost. Only pieces of pain, aggression, desire for revenge remain. These fragments can reincarnate, but no longer as a whole personality, rather as a broken, half-blind energy. Cayce called such incarnations dangerous, because in them the soul almost does not control itself, and then it can cause new evil without even realizing it. This essentially is the lowest point, not hell in the religious sense, but a fall beyond purpose. The soul forgets why it exists and no longer seeks a way out, and that is scarier than any punishment. But even in this state, according to Cayce, a spark can be reignited through pain, through the compassion of others, through the very fact of life, because life is always a chance. Even if the soul lies in ashes, one breath, one encounter, one tear can begin the path back. He told of cases when the darkest souls, suddenly touched by kindness they did not expect, began to cry, not physically, but internally. In those tears there were no words, only memory, and that was the first step. So what now? If you've listened to the end, it's not a coincidence. It means you feel. Somewhere deep inside, you understand. The world is not divided into black and white. Evil is not always an enemy. Sometimes, it's a signal, a cry. I'm lost. Find me. And if you know how to listen, if you're not afraid to look into the darkness, you are already part of the great balance, because in the end, according to Cayce, everything returns to the light, not immediately, not easily, not for everyone, but everything strives for the source. Even the most terrifying souls, even those we believe to be forever damned, they are on the path, just like us. And that means there is a choice. And if you are in the light right now, hold it, keep it, pass it on, because perhaps it is your light that will save someone who has long been forgotten, even if that someone was the soul of Hitler. And in that is true justice, not punishment, but transformation. If you felt that this video made you reflect, hit the like button. It's not just a click, it's a signal that you care. Share this video with those who are searching for answers. Maybe someone right now is on the edge, and they need to hear that even in the deepest darkness, a way back can be found. Subscribe if you are drawn to the topics of the soul, life after death, and the great meaning we don't always see but always feel. And in the comments write, do you believe that even the darkest souls can change? The answer may be simple, but each of us is part of a greater story. See you in the next video, and remember, the light begins with you.